All right. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our webinar, Performance Management for SMEs. We're really glad that you're able to join us today. Just a quick introduction about us too. My name is Neath, and I'm the manager of the HR advisory practice, and I've been at Employment Hero for about 2.5 years, and I've got my colleague Tim with me here today as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Tim. I've also been with Employment Hero for 2.5 years, previously working as a senior advisor and now as a team leader in the advisory practice.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Tim. We're both incredibly passionate about helping small businesses thrive, and we understand the unique hats that our audience members wear every single day. As owners and managers, you're juggling so much, and performance management can sometimes feel like another plate to spin. But knowing how to do it properly and knowing how to set yourself up for success before you get to the stage of having to performance manage someone will prevent a lot of headaches down the track. So today we're going to unpack performance reviews and performance management, specifically with your needs in mind. Our goal here is for you to walk away with not just the theory, but also things that you can practically implement in your businesses. So by the end of this session today, you'll understand the why. That is, we'll explore why effective performance management and appraisal aren't just an HR chore, but a powerful tool for growth and employee engagement. You'll also learn best practices. And to be specific, we'll share our top tips for conducting meaningful and impactful performance appraisals. You'll also learn to navigate challenges compliantly. And we know that legal compliance can be a real headache for a lot of us, so we'll touch on how to handle performance issues effectively and within the lines. Lastly, you'll gain practical takeaways and resources. So we're not just going to talk theory, you'll also get some concrete strategies and resources that you can implement straight away as well. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we jump into the content today. We'll start with a quick disclaimer. The information presented today is current as of the 24th of July, 2025, and our discussion here today is intended to be informative and educational in nature, and it's not to be taken as professional advice. So if you require professional advice in relation to your specific circumstances, please feel free to reach out to my team. We absolutely encourage your questions as well, so please feel free to use the Q&A function to submit any questions you have throughout the session. We'll be setting aside some time at the end to answer as many questions as we can. Also, please don't worry about taking notes. We'll be sending out a resource pack after the webinar itself, which will include the recording, the slides, and our answers to the questions that we're not able to get to at the end of this webinar today. So please feel free to relax and focus on the content and engage with us. All right, let's get started. I'll hand over to Tim to kick us off.
We'll begin today's webinar by delving into how to set your employees up for success so they perform to the required standards of your business. We'll kick off by explaining the importance of setting clear performance expectations, and then we'll go into performance appraisals, which is all about having in place a system to assess and communicate to your staff as to whether they have performed to those expectations. From a business perspective, setting clear performance expectations directly leads to increased productivity and profitability. When employees clearly understand their goals and expectations, they're better equipped to meet and exceed targets, ultimately driving your business's bottom line. Clear expectations remove ambiguity and allow for greater focus and efficiency, which naturally boosts productivity. Enhanced productivity translates into increased profitability, giving your business a competitive edge in the marketplace. Moreover, clear performance goals help in identifying areas for improvement proactively, allowing businesses to rectify issues before they escalate into major problems. For instance, consider a sales team with clear and measurable targets. Each team member knows exactly what's expected, which significantly increases the chances of achieving or even exceeding these goals. Compare this to a scenario without clear objectives. Employees might put in effort, but their energies could be misaligned or wasted, negatively impacting profitability and morale. Once you've set clear goals, it's important to reinforce them through regular, well-structured performance discussions. Consistent, constructive feedback helps employees feel valued and supported, boosting engagement and reducing turnover, which also results in a reduction in recruitment, onboarding, and training costs. Studies consistently show that organizations with highly engaged teams routinely outperform competitors on customer satisfaction, productivity, and profitability. Consider an employee who receives little feedback. Over time, they disengage and eventually look for employment elsewhere. By contrast, timely conversations that acknowledge an employee's achievements and provide targeted guidance signal genuine investment in their development, fostering employee loyalty and sustained motivation. Effective performance appraisals also function as an early indicator of emerging talent. When leadership potential surfaces during regular reviews, you can initiate coaching or mentoring immediately, strengthening your pipeline of future leaders. Finally, a structured performance appraisal framework aligns an employee's day-to-day work with broader business objectives. Clear links between individual contributions and organizational goals enhance collaboration across teams and give employees a compelling why behind their efforts. Now, let's look at performance appraisals from the employee's perspective. From an employee perspective, performance appraisals provide clarity on what is expected from them in their role. When employees know what success looks like through clear responsibilities and well-defined KPIs, they can plan, prioritize, and execute with confidence. This cuts stress, boosts autonomy, and turns effort into measurable results. Performance appraisals also create opportunities for growth and development. Regular appraisals assist in identifying an employee's ambitions and skill gaps early, so you can ensure employees receive timely training and mentoring. For example, when a business becomes aware of an employee's aspiration of moving into a management role, they can quickly move into leadership training and mentoring, accelerating the employee's career growth. Not only does this strengthen the business talent pipeline, it also helps employees feel valued, which results in ongoing loyalty to the company. Timely recognition of an employee's contribution is another key benefit of ongoing performance conversations. Prompt, sincere acknowledgement of a job well done, whether it's a quiet thank you or a spotlight in the team meeting, elevates morale and reinforces the behaviors you want repeated. Done consistently, recognition cultivates a culture where high performance feels both noticed and valued. Finally, constructive feedback turns good intentions into action. Specific, timely guidance pinpoints where an employee can refine a skill or adjust their approach. Because the advice is actionable, employees can close gaps quickly, turning feedback cycles into continuous improvement loops that lift both individual and organizational performance. In short, a structured performance appraisal process provides clarity, fuels development, celebrates wins, and drives improvement, which are all key ingredients for a motivated workforce and a resilient business. Now, let's touch briefly on the compliance landscape relevant to performance appraisals. Making sure there's clarity around performance expectations from the get-go and having in place a robust performance appraisal system are absolutely key for employers. These elements are so important from a compliance standpoint, particularly under the Fair Work Act, and especially if things go south and you need to go down the performance management path, which we will talk about in more detail a little bit later on. The Fair Work Act heavily emphasizes fairness and procedural integrity in all performance-related matters. By setting clear expectations and having an effective appraisal system, employers significantly bolster their position, especially when addressing underperformance. This proactive approach helps reduce exposure to legal risks, such as unfair dismissal claims, by ensuring a documented, transparent process. When a need arises to manage underperformance or implement a performance improvement plan, or PIP, a well-structured system provides the necessary evidence of fair process and ample opportunity for improvement given to the employee. This not only aids in compliance, but also fosters a workplace built on transparency and trust. Now, let's explore how these foundational principles translate into practical, effective performance appraisal processes that set your business up for success.
Thank you for that, Tim. So the first thing to do is to get your preparation right. Performance appraisals shouldn't be one-off annual events. If you have a performance review that is part of your performance appraisal system, the review should represent a culmination of ongoing performance appraisals. To prepare effectively for any sort of performance appraisal, whether it be a formal performance review or informal check-in, begin by clearly setting expectations early on. And this includes making sure that you have in place detailed job descriptions for your employees. And by that, I mean the kind that clearly outlines what their role involves, what their responsibilities are, and what outcomes they're required to achieve. Every employee should understand clearly from their job descriptions what success in their role looks like and how their success is measured. For the measurement aspect, it's useful to define KPIs to measure their performance objectively. And KPIs should be quantifiable wherever possible. So, for example, sales targets or client retention rates or customer satisfaction scores. Another aspect of preparation involves ensuring that whatever performance targets you set for your staff actually align with your organization's values and strategic objectives. Each employee's KPIs should not exist in isolation, but should directly reflect broader company goals. For instance, so if your business prioritizes exceptional customer service, individual performance targets should explicitly incorporate customer service related goals as well. To ensure effective preparation, it's also a good idea to maintain regular documentation of employee performance throughout the entire review cycle. Keep accurate notes on specific accomplishments, areas for improvement, and any developmental activities undertaken. Doing this ensures that the review conversation is based on actual data rather than subjective opinions or recollections. It also protects the organization from a compliance standpoint as well by acting as evidence to demonstrate a fair and consistent process. When it comes to effective performance appraisals, it's really important to keep in mind that these are processes that take place in an environment of continuous dialogue. Regular, informal check-ins or quarterly meetings can maintain momentum and immediately address issues before they become more serious. So, for example, monthly one-on-one sessions are a great tool that allows employees to openly discuss their progress, seek clarification on expectations, and provide managers with timely feedback on the challenges they're facing. Regular conversations strengthen relationships between managers and employees as well, and they go a really long way in building trust and enabling honest communication. And on top of all of that, ongoing feedback allows employees to adjust their approach proactively, which in turn improves overall performance and satisfaction. And instead of waiting for months and months on end to hear how they're doing, employees gain regular insights into their strengths and areas of improvement. And this approach promotes a culture of continuous improvement and accountability as well. Documenting performance appraisals thoroughly and consistently is super important. Accurate, timely documentation ensures that performance reviews are fair and that they're transparent and based on evidence rather than perception or memory alone. The individuals responsible for conducting these appraisals should document both achievements and areas requiring improvement, using clear and specific examples. So, for instance, instead of noting that Sarah's performance needs improvement, specify exactly what aspect of Sarah's performance fell short. Perhaps, she missed deadlines, or maybe she made certain errors with a task that she was assigned to complete. It's also really important to maintain these records confidentially and securely. Consistent documentation allows for a fairer and more structured conversation, and what it also does is offer clear evidence should disciplinary action or dismissal ever become necessary. Proper documentation also facilitates smoother transitions as well if managerial changes occur. It ensures that the new supervisors have a clear understanding of each employee's performance history. Now, moving on to conducting performance review meetings. The actual performance review meeting should have a clear structure and agenda. Begin with a positive opening that sets a constructive tone for the conversation itself. And you can do that by making clear from the outset that the purpose of the meeting is to recognize successes, address areas for growth, and work together to set future goals. Encourage your employee to start with a self-assessment, which is done by reflecting on their own achievements and areas they believe they could improve in. Self-assessments empower employees to take ownership of their performance and identify growth opportunities in a proactive way. Next, managers should provide their perspective, offering specific examples to support each point made to the employee. Clearly articulate the employee's achievements as well, and keep in mind that this is actually a really great way to reinforce positive behaviors that you want to continue seeing in your employee in the future. Conversely, discuss areas that you think the employee needs improvement in, but of course in a constructive way, using factual evidence and specific scenarios to illustrate your concerns. Effective communication is absolutely critical during performance reviews. Managers should practice active listening by showing genuine interest, acknowledge the employee's views, and seek clarification when necessary. Active listening ensures employees feel heard and respected, which in turn significantly enhances trust and collaboration in the process. Provide feedback constructively using the Situation, Behavior, Impact, or SBI framework. So, for instance, rather than vaguely saying your communication skills need improvement, perhaps you can say something along the lines of, in last week's client meeting, so you're describing the situation, your responses were brief and unclear. You're describing the behavior, right? Which left the client feeling confused and uncertain about our services. And that's you describing the impact. The SBI model provides clear, actionable insights that employees can understand and respond to effectively. I also encourage you to ask open-ended questions, and what that does is it encourages dialogue. So some questions you might ask are, how do you feel you could improve in this area, right? Or what support or training do you think would help you achieve this goal? Or perhaps something along the lines of, can you share some challenges you've experienced recently? And by taking this approach, it transforms your review into a two-way conversation rather than a one-sided critique, and that then leads to more meaningful outcomes.
Now that you've spoken to your employee about areas they need to improve in, how do you have a conversation about future goals? When setting future performance goals during reviews, the gold standard to apply is the SMART framework: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This framework is not only helpful for setting future goals, you can also use it for setting KPIs at the start as well. Let's unpack each component in the framework. Specific. Clearly define exactly what is expected. For example, instead of improve customer service, specify increase customer satisfaction scores by 15% over the next quarter. Measurable. Goals must have quantifiable benchmarks. Measurable outcomes allow objective tracking of progress, ensuring clarity around expectations. Achievable. Ensure the goal is realistic, given the employee's resources, skills, and available support. Unattainable goals are demotivating and counterproductive. Relevant. Goals should align directly with the employee's role and the organization's overall objectives. And finally, time-bound. Clearly specified deadlines. Timeframes help employees prioritize their work and stay focused on achieving goals within an expected period. SMART goals facilitate clear understanding, effective performance tracking, and stronger accountability. Discrepancies or disagreements during reviews are natural. It's crucial to handle these professionally and respectfully. If an employee disputes feedback, remain calm, factual, and objective. Avoid becoming defensive or argumentative. Invite the employee to present their perspectives fully, actively listening to their views. Clarify any misunderstandings with concrete examples and collaboratively work towards mutual understanding. Document discrepancies clearly, noting both perspectives, and agree on the next steps or follow-up actions. This transparency ensures fairness and maintains trust in the process. The period following a performance review is just as critical as the review itself. This is where the real work of nurturing employee growth and ensuring accountability happens. Post-review follow-up is about building on the discussions held and translating them into tangible progress. The best practice approach to follow-up involves scheduled, regular check-ins. These aren't impromptu chats, but dedicated opportunities to discuss progress on agreed-upon goals. So revisit the objectives set during the review and discuss what's working well and what challenges have arisen. Provide additional support and resources, so offering guidance, training, or tools that can help the employee overcome obstacles and achieve their targets. And finally, acknowledge and celebrate improvements. Recognizing progress, no matter how small, reinforces positive behavior and motivates continued effort. This ongoing dialogue shows your commitment to the employee's success, which can really boost morale and engagement. It also ensures that performance goals remain relevant and achievable, and most importantly, that those goals adapt to any changing circumstances. While the main focus of follow-up is on development, there might be instances where more structured support, such as a performance improvement plan or PIP, becomes necessary to address persistent underperformance. However, we'll delve into the specifics of PIPs in a dedicated section later. For now, let's remember that effective performance appraisals are an ongoing process of monitoring, support, and continuous improvement. Lastly, leverage templates and tools to standardize your review processes. Templates for performance reviews, self-assessments, feedback forms, and PIPs ensure consistency, fairness, and thorough documentation across the organization. Using consistent templates makes comparisons over time easier and ensures managers stick to best practices. Templates also streamline processes, saving valuable managerial time and ensuring compliance with relevant legal frameworks. Here at Employment Hero, we can provide a suite of performance appraisal templates designed to empower employers in fostering a high-performing and engaged workforce. Employers seeking to leverage these resources are encouraged to contact us for more information. Our team is available to discuss your specific performance appraisal needs, advise on which documents are best suited to your circumstances, and provide those documents accordingly. If, despite these supportive measures, employee performance doesn't meet expectations, you may need to transition from appraisal to formal performance management processes. In these instances, more structured actions, such as formal written warnings and performance improvement plans, can help address persistent underperformance. It's crucial to clearly differentiate between regular, constructive performance appraisals and formal performance management measures that address ongoing or serious performance issues. Thank you. I'll now pass over to Neath to discuss performance management and the challenges associated with navigating performance management.
Thanks, Tim. So building on what we've just learned about establishing clear performance expectations and having in place good performance appraisal system, we'll now shift gears a little bit just to focus on the critical next steps, which are all about navigating the challenges that arise when those expectations aren't consistently met. We'll look at all the practicalities of identifying, addressing, and managing underperformance effectively, and most importantly, compliantly. I'll start by reiterating what was said earlier. Performance management isn't just a one-off thing. It's an ongoing and dynamic process aimed at ensuring that your team is productive and engaged and contributing positively to your business goals. Mastering this area is very important, not only for productivity, but also for mitigating significant compliance risks under various laws, such as the Fair Work Act. To help you master this area, in this segment of the webinar, we'll be covering things like how to identify underperformance, how to implement robust performance improvement plans, understanding the difference between poor performance and misconduct, and ultimately navigating the sensitive area of termination for performance-related reasons. We'll also provide some case law examples to illustrate the dangers of getting it wrong and the lessons that we can take away from those cases. All right, let's begin by looking at how we can accurately identify underperformance. The first step in performance management is accurately identifying underperformance. And this sounds really straightforward, but it's often an area where we see our clients stumble. And the key here is to differentiate between objective and subjective assessments. So to begin, an objective assessment is based on verifiable facts and data. So think about sales targets not being met, consistent errors in a specific task, or a measurable decline in productivity. These are the things that you can quantify and demonstrate with clear evidence. For example, if a team member's role requires them to process, say, 50 invoices per day, and they are consistently only processing 30, that's an objective measure of underperformance. In contrast, a subjective assessment is based on personal opinions, feelings, or perceptions. So statements like, I just don't think they're pulling their weight, or they have a bad attitude, they're all subjective. And while these feelings might be indicators of an underlying issue, they are not enough, or they're not sufficient on their own to justify performance management actions, and they can easily lead to disputes as well. So it's really important to translate subjective observations into objective examples so that we can actually take concrete steps to address them. Once you suspect underperformance, the next step is gathering data and evidence. This is your foundation for any subsequent action, and without solid evidence, any subsequent performance management action taken can appear illegitimate and artificial, which then makes it really, really hard to defend in the context of a dispute. Another way to look at it is an underperforming employee is not going to want to willingly participate in a process that they might perceive as a witch hunt instead of one that is backed by clear evidence. So, what kind of evidence are we talking about? We're talking about performance metrics and KPIs. Are they meeting their targets? If not, by how much? We're also talking about work output samples, right? Are there examples of poor quality work, errors, or missed deadlines? Customer or client feedback is another form of evidence. Is there documented feedback regarding their performance? And finally, records of previous discussions or warnings. So have these issues been raised before and are they actually documented? If we are expressing a view that an employee's work quality is poor, it makes sense to collect examples of specific deficiencies in their work. So say, for example, if you have a hairdresser who applied heat for too long to a client's hair, which then causes it to burn, an example of their work deficiency could be an email from the client raising a complaint about their damaged hair, right? The key takeaway message here is the more concrete and verifiable your evidence, the stronger your position when it comes to taking formal action to address the performance issue. Before jumping straight into a formal performance improvement plan, it is always a good idea to think about early intervention strategies first. Often, underperformance is not malicious. It could stem from a lack of understanding or insufficient training or personal issues or even a mismatch in roles. And early intervention can save a great deal of time, resources, and often the employment relationship itself. These strategies might include things like informal coaching and feedback, and by that I mean a direct private conversation about the specific concerns you have, offering support and clarifying expectations. It could also be additional training or mentoring, right? Is there a skill gap that can be addressed through further development? Another strategy might be reviewing their workload or role clarity. And this involves thinking about whether the employee is feeling overwhelmed or unclear about their responsibilities. Another one to consider is connecting them with support services. If personal issues are impacting their work and the quality of their work, can you direct them to EAP or other relevant support services? It's always a good idea to document these early intervention strategies, even if informal. A brief note on file or an email to confirm your discussions with them, detailing the date, what was discussed, and any agreed upon actions can really be valuable if the situation escalates. So now, what happens when you've tried all sorts of informal approaches and nothing seems to be working in terms of lifting your employees' performance? When underperformance is serious or persistent despite early interventions, that's when a formal performance improvement plan or a PIP becomes necessary. A PIP should be considered for serious or persistent underperformance. So you might have heard of PIPs before, but what are they exactly? A PIP is essentially a structured process designed to provide an employee with clear expectations and support and a defined time frame to improve their performance to an acceptable standard. It's not a punishment, and it shouldn't be seen as such. It's a tool for improvement, and it has to be used correctly to be effective. When it comes to a good PIP, I want you to think of it as a process. And it's not just a document that we can tick off so that we can get rid of an employee that we don't like, right? It's not just about telling someone that they're not performing, it's actually about guiding them to where they need to be. There are several key components that should be included as a matter of best practice for a PIP to not only be effective, but for it to be able to stand up to scrutiny as well. Firstly, there needs to be a clear statement of performance gap. This is not vague, it has to be specific. So things like your sales figures for the last quarter were 20% below target is clear, right? But you're not selling enough is not clear. The gap should be articulated in terms of specific tasks, responsibilities, or measurable outputs that are not being met. Secondly, there also needs to be specific measurable improvement goals. And these are the targets that the employee needs to hit. They should be SMART, as Tim said earlier, right? So it needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So for instance, a goal could look like increase sales by 15% in the next 8 weeks, generating at least X amount of dollars in new revenue. Or it could be something like reduce errors in data entry by 50% by the end of the month, as measured by audit checks. So these goals must directly address the identified performance gap. Thirdly, support and resources need to be provided by the employer as part of the process itself. A PIP is not just a stick, it needs to be a carrot as well. What is the employer doing to help the employee succeed? And this could include additional training. So perhaps, if your employee works in a software role, perhaps additional software training. It could also be mentoring or providing access to new tools or resources, or perhaps increased supervisory support and regular check-ins. Without this, it could be argued that the employer didn't provide a fair opportunity for improvement, which is a key consideration in unfair dismissal claims. The fourth element is a reasonable time frame for improvement. And this time frame needs to be realistic and achievable given the nature of the performance gap and the level of improvement required. A typical time frame might be 4 to 8 weeks, but it could also be longer for highly complex roles or significant skill development. It's crucial that this time frame is clearly communicated and adhered to, with regular review points built in as well. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, a PIP must clearly state the consequences of not meeting the plan. So in a good PIP, you will often see a clear warning that if performance doesn't improve, the employee could face disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment. I want to make this clear. This statement is not a threat, right? It's a clear statement of reality. The employee who is subject to the PIP needs to understand the gravity of the situation and the potential outcomes if performance does not improve. And this manages expectations and provides a clear and transparent pathway forward.
Given these elements, the key message here, and I can't stress this enough, is process, process, process. When it comes to workplace law, particularly under the Fair Work Act, the fairness of the process is arguably almost as important as the justification for the action itself. It almost goes without saying that adhering to principles of natural justice and procedural fairness is incredibly important, especially when it comes to ensuring that the way you manage an employee's underperformance is defensible. So, with all this talk about procedural fairness and natural justice, what does this mean in practice? It means the right to know. That is, the employee must be fully informed of the allegations against them and the standards they are failing to meet, and this should also be in writing. The right to respond. That is, they must be given a genuine opportunity to respond to the allegations of underperformance, explain their performance, and present any mitigating circumstances. This usually involves a formal meeting, and they should be given adequate time to prepare their response. Being given an opportunity to bring a support person. Although there is no right to bring a support person to performance-related meetings, as a matter of best practice, the employee should be offered the opportunity to have a support person present at any formal meeting. Keep in mind that these meetings can be very emotionally taxing. The support person is there to provide emotional support, not to act as an advocate or legal representative. Unbiased decision maker. The person making the decision should be unbiased and consider all information presented. And finally, consideration of response. The employer must genuinely consider the employee's response before making a decision. Even if you have a perfectly valid reason for managing somebody's performance, a flawed process can result in an unfair dismissal claim, regardless of the employee's poor performance. There are a plethora of unfair dismissal decisions from the Fair Work Commission, which has shown time and time again that the Commission places a huge amount of emphasis on procedural fairness and natural justice in the context of performance-related dismissals. We'll explore some of those cases a little bit later on. Before we do a deep dive into issues connected with mismanaging underperformance, we want to spend a bit of time talking about poor performance and how it differs from misconduct. In our work, we see time and time again that our clients tend to conflate the two. This is a crucial distinction that many businesses get wrong. And what often happens is we see employers applying not the most effective approach to managing the issue at hand. So we'll start by explaining the difference between the two, and we'll then explain how knowing the differences has implications for how you manage each type of issue. Poor performance relates to an employee's inability to perform to the expected standards. In simple terms, it's a skill issue. For example, you might have a hairdresser who takes too long to cut hair, or you might have a consultant who doesn't get back to their client within the required SLA because they cannot effectively prioritize their workload. With poor performance, the medicine for this ailment is generally in the form of a structured performance management process, including warnings and a PIP. Misconduct, on the other hand, is not a skill issue. It's more of a will issue. In simple terms, an employee knows they need to behave in a certain way, but they don't. For example, you might have an employee who is persistently late to work, even though the organization has a clear stance that lateness is not acceptable. Or you might have a construction worker drinking alcohol on site, even though the organization has a zero tolerance stance towards alcohol consumption at work. Misconduct can be serious too, and some examples of serious misconduct include sexual harassment, theft, and assault. With misconduct, the medicine for this ailment is making sure that you investigate the allegations thoroughly and applying the appropriate disciplinary procedures. Now, if you didn't know the difference, the best case scenario is you might be wasting your time, and the worst case scenario is you might apply a process that you would struggle to defend in the event of a claim. We'll explain what this means exactly. If you use a PIP to manage a misconduct issue, you might be spending a lot of time managing it when you don't need to. Say, for example, you have an employee who came to work late without a reasonable excuse. Instead of putting them on a PIP for 4 weeks to see if they're going to be late again, you can instead put them through a disciplinary process and issue them a warning to make clear this cannot happen again, or otherwise they could face further disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment. Conversely, if you use a disciplinary process to manage a performance issue, you might not be giving the employee enough time to improve their performance before making a decision to terminate their employment. So as you can see here, knowing the difference between the two helps to ensure that you manage the issue at hand efficiently, and more importantly, in a way that is defensible if there is a legal dispute. Now let's turn our attention to what can happen when performance management goes wrong. We've spoken at length about what good performance management looks like, but it's also useful to explain how we've come to this view about good performance management. What I'm trying to say here is we only know what good looks like because we know what bad looks like. So at this juncture, I want to specifically talk about the dangers of mismanaging underperformance. I'll start by saying a poorly managed performance management process can create a lot of headaches, leading to costly and stressful disputes. The advisory team often sees 2 common pitfalls when it comes to PIPs and underperformance. Pitfall 1, clear or unreasonable targets in PIPs. A PIP is designed to give an employee a clear roadmap for improvement. But if that roadmap is blurry or the destination is simply unachievable, it sets everyone up for failure. Some common mistakes we see are lack of specificity. So we often see PIPs that use vague language like improve communication or be more proactive. But what does that actually mean in measurable terms? Without clear, specific, and measurable targets, the employee doesn't know what they need to do to improve, and the employer can't objectively assess their progress. This leaves the door open for arguments that the PIP was a sham or a precursor to dismissal. We also see unrealistic expectations. Sometimes the targets set in a PIP are simply not reasonable within the given time frame, or they don't account for external factors or the employee's genuine capacity. Expecting an employee to double their sales figures in 2 weeks, for example, without additional resources or training is a recipe for disaster. This can lead to an employee feeling like they've been set up to fail, which then impacts morale and potentially giving rise to allegations of bullying or some other form of adverse treatment. A compelling example of unreasonable targets contributing to unfair dismissal finding can be found in the case of Chuchi Wang versus Perfect Shape Medical Beauty Australia. This is a case about a part-time sales and beauty consultant who was dismissed by her employer on the basis of consistent unsatisfactory performance and not reaching sales target. Context, the employer imposed a $150,000 per month sales target for all consultants, irrespective of their employment status, full-time or part-time. When an unfair dismissal claim was brought against them, they couldn't provide any evidence to show that the target was reasonable, nor were they able to show that anyone was able to achieve the target. The Fair Work Commission found that the target was not reasonable and concluded that the employer had no valid reason to terminate the employee. To expand on the Commission's conclusion a bit further, it was found that the purported sales target was arbitrarily set and applied, and the employer's reliance on them was not sound, defensible, or well founded. Beyond the unreasonable targets, the employer's conduct was further criticised for failing to notify Ms. Wang of any valid reasons for dismissal, denying her an opportunity to respond, and unreasonably refusing her request for a support person. The case serves as a crucial reminder for businesses. Performance targets must be justifiable and realistically applied, and proper process is paramount in any dismissal to avoid findings of unfairness.
All right, so moving on to pitfall number 2. The advisory team also often see employers not prioritizing procedural fairness throughout the formal performance management process. Procedural fairness is absolutely critical in any performance management process, especially when dismissal might be on the cards. We often see situations where employers fail to give employees a genuine opportunity to understand the concerns, respond to them, and then truly influence the outcome. And this needs to extend throughout the performance management process itself and not just at the point of dismissal. One of the most common issues we see relates to not giving the employee a reasonable opportunity to improve. So it's not enough to simply identify a performance gap. Employers need to ensure that the employee is given a genuine, practical chance to address concerns. We often see situations where the improvement period is too short, or the support and training provided are inadequate for the scale of improvement expected. Without offering a reasonable opportunity, it becomes incredibly difficult for an employee to genuinely turn their performance around, and for an employer to later down the track argue that underperformance justifies dismissal. Another frequent misstep we see occurs when employers, perhaps with good intentions, fail to deliver clear and unequivocal warnings about the consequences of continued underperformance. While it's really important to be supportive, and we often see cases where employers want to take, I guess, the gentle approach, which is completely fair enough, and they don't explicitly state that if performance doesn't improve, termination of employment is a real possibility. Warnings should clearly identify areas of deficiency, outline the support or training available, specify the required standards, and set a reasonable time frame for improvement. And if an employee is merely asked to do better without understanding that their job is genuinely at risk, a subsequent dismissal for underperformance is highly likely to be found procedurally unfair. So let's take a look at a case that illustrates the importance of procedural fairness when it comes to managing a PIP process. So here on the screen, I've included some details for you to peruse. So in the case of Wellesby and Artist Group Pty Ltd, the Fair Work Commission looked at a dismissal of a senior management employee due to underperformance. And to be specific, he wasn't able to achieve the financial target set for the business branch that he was in charge of. And although the employer had discussed his performance issues on various occasions before deciding to eventually terminate him, the commission still found that his dismissal was unfair. This finding was reached despite the fact that the employer was able to successfully argue that they had a valid reason to terminate his employment. So what the employee did was he ran the argument that he wasn't adequately warned about the consequences of his poor performance or given a reasonable opportunity to improve. He was not explicitly warned that his job was in jeopardy due to ongoing poor performance. And this failure to provide a formal warning meant that the employee wasn't afforded a proper chance to improve, leading the commissioner to conclude that the dismissal was harsh, unjust, or unreasonable, despite having found that there was a valid reason to dismiss him in the first place. And what this case does is it serves as a vital reminder for employers about the necessity of clear warnings and providing genuine opportunities for improvement, even for senior staff members. So, all of the lessons we've learned today in this webinar about what bad performance management looks like come from termination cases. So it's only apt to touch on the issue of termination in the final section of our webinar. Termination for performance-related reasons should always be considered as the last resort, right? It's the culmination of a clear process, a well-documented and fair process that has provided the employee with every reasonable opportunity to improve. If you find yourself at this point, it means that despite all of your best efforts through coaching and providing feedback and putting them through a formal PIP, the employee's performance still has not met the required standards. Before proceeding with termination, you need to ask yourself whether you're confident that you have clearly communicated performance expectations and provided job descriptions, and that you have provided adequate training, support, and resources as part of the PIP, or you have given clear and specific feedback on performance deficiencies backed by clear evidence as well, and that you have implemented a formal PIP with reasonable goals and timeframes and conducted regular reviews. You've given the employee a genuine opportunity to respond to concerns at each formal stage of the process, and you've considered their response fairly and documented how it was considered, and you've documented every step of the process, including meeting minutes, warning letters, PIP documents, and review outcomes. If you're not confident about being able to demonstrate all of the above, then there will likely be some exposure to compliance risks, the main one being an unfair dismissal finding. Section 387 of the Fair Work Act allows an employee to claim unfair dismissal if their dismissal was harsh, unjust, or unreasonable. And the Fair Work Commission, when assessing an unfair dismissal claim, will consider several factors, including whether there was a valid reason for the dismissal related to the person's capacity or conduct. So, was the poor performance genuinely occurring and impacting the business, and was it a consistent issue? Another factor that is looked at as well is whether the person was notified of that reason, right? Did they receive a clear written notice of the performance issues and the risk to their employment? Whether the person was given an opportunity to respond to any reason related to the capacity or the conduct. So were they invited to a meeting, given time to prepare, and allowed to have a support person, right? And the catch-all factor that the commission looks at is any other matters that the Fair Work Commission considers relevant. And this can include things like the size of the employer's enterprise, the absence of a dedicated HR function, and any other mitigating circumstances raised by the employee. So things like, perhaps they experience personal issues affecting their work, or maybe they have an illness that is impacting, their productivity, things of that nature, right? So employers need to demonstrate that they genuinely considered all of these factors as well. The employer bears a lot of the onus in demonstrating that the dismissal was not harsh, unjust, or unreasonable. And this is where robust documentation and a clear and fair process becomes your strongest shield. Beyond the standard poor performance scenario, you might also encounter more complex situations as well. So for example, the performance issue might be affected by a medical condition or a disability. If an employee's performance issues are linked to a medical condition or disability, you have obligations under work health and safety laws, as well as disability discrimination laws at both a federal and state level as well. And this might involve exploring reasonable adjustments before entering into a performance management process. And you must ensure that the process is not in any way discriminatory. You might also see a performance issue intertwined with workplace behavior or bullying claims. So sometimes a performance issue might be a symptom of a larger workplace issue, or a performance discussion might trigger a counterclaim of bullying. So these situations require careful navigation and often separate investigation processes. Another one that you might come across is long-term performance issues without formal management. And if underperformance has been tolerated for a long time, introducing a formal process needs to be handled carefully, making sure that the introduction of such a process is a demonstration that standards are now being enforced, rather than being seen as something arbitrary. Another scenario that could complicate matters is when an employee raises a grievance during performance management process. So if an employee raises a grievance during the PIP, you may need to address the grievance thoroughly before proceeding with the PIP to ensure fairness and transparency. In all of these scenarios, the principle of natural justice and procedural fairness continue to be of utmost importance, but the specific steps and considerations might become a little bit more nuanced.
Given these complexities and potential risks, knowing when to escalate and seek professional advice is crucial. As HR advisory and compliance experts, we often see businesses facing significant issues that could have been avoided with timely advice. So when should you seek professional advice? First, before initiating a formal PIP, so especially if it's your first time or if the situation is particularly complex or involves senior employees. If the employee disputes the allegations or the process, so their formal response may raise a range of compliance issues you might need to carefully consider. If the employee raises a grievance or makes a bullying or harassment claim during the performance management process, as this can significantly complicate matters and require careful advice. Before making a decision on termination, so an expert can review your documentation and process to ensure compliance and minimize risks. And finally, when dealing with complex cases involving protected attributes. If performance issues seem linked to discrimination, disability, or other protected characteristics, seek immediate advice to ensure you don't inadvertently breach discrimination laws. It's far more cost-effective to seek advice proactively than to deal with legal claims, which can be time-consuming, expensive, and damaging to your business's reputation. Don't hesitate to escalate and seek professional guidance when you're unsure.
All right, everyone, that brings us to the end of our webinar today. And just to wrap it all up, there are 4 key takeaways that I want everyone to keep in mind when it comes to performance appraisals and management. So 1, set clear expectations from the get-go. 2, document everything, including informal conversations. And 3, follow a fair process when it comes to managing underperformance. And 4, seek advice early, especially for complex scenarios, like Tim said earlier. So if it involves protected attributes, that's when you should probably seek advice early. Remembering these 4 points will go a long way in fostering a high-performing culture within your business and preventing legal dramas down the track. So thank you so much for your time and attention. We really appreciate you joining us. And now it's time to open the floor for your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can right now. But if we don't get to yours, don't worry. We'll make sure to send across our response in the comprehensive resource pack that will follow. All right, so let's have a look at the Q&A box now to see what questions we received.
I can jump on one question if you'd like, Neath.
Yeah, go for it, Tim.
Yep. So good question was raised, so I'll just read it out for everybody. For misconduct issues, it is often stated that disciplinary action can be taken up to and including dismissal. Can you provide some examples of action prior to dismissal? That is, what does up to mean? So there's generally 3 outcomes when it comes to disciplinary action. The first would be a verbal warning, the second would be a written warning, and the third would be that dismissal. Now, thinking back to the procedural fairness, it's very important that before you come to that determination of which step to take, you have to look at, the feedback that the employee provided on the situation. Has the employee been notified of the, behavior before, to then help you come to the determination of which would be the appropriate outcome to proceed with. So say, for example, you had an employee who it's their 3rd time of committing some form of misconduct. And previously you've started with a verbal warning. You've then proceeded to a written warning the 2nd time. The 3rd time, you would then consider what the employee says. You may consider dismissal, or you may consider a 2nd and final warning, depending on the severity of the misconduct. But that's just a couple of the examples of what an outcome can be prior to dismissal.
It's a fantastic answer, Tim. I might give it a go as well. I have a really great question from Sarah Steele. So her question is, in your experience within advisory, what stage do most organizations get it wrong? And that is a fantastic question, Sarah. And I would say that in my experience, the stage that a lot of employers get wrong is the initial stages of the process, right? So let's say you've tried all the early intervention strategies and you're now at a point where you want to start the PIP process, right? A lot of the times I see PIPs being written in a really vague way, right? So the things that we addressed in the body of the webinar today, right? So things like, they need to be more proactive, they need to take more initiative. And while those things are really incredibly important, the purpose of the PIP process itself is to give the employee a chance to demonstrate measurable and clear improvements, right? And if you have something like be more proactive, how are you going to measure that, right? How are you going to like, and even if they improve, like, is the improvement enough? Right? So it's really difficult to measure something like that. And that's why it's really important to get the early stages right. And with the early stages, it's so important to be as specific as you can, because otherwise, when you're like, 4 weeks or, 2 months down the track and everything is vague, and you now want to terminate, you're going to be in a really difficult position to do that, right? And if you end up terminating, the PIP process itself is not likely to be defensible. Okay. All right, so let's go through a couple more. Um, so I might do this one from Sonia Mahoney. So the question is, often people are reluctant to performance manage when the person starts to have health and illness issues. What is the best approach if illness is involved? And again, that's a really great question from you there, Sonia. So the best approach is to have a clear understanding of what the illness is first, right? Because if there are legitimate reasons, or if there are legitimate sort of a rationale as to why they're underperforming, and that is directly tied to their um, performance, then we have to understand, the nature of their illness and what they can and cannot do, right? And then once we have that information, we can decide to amend or design our KPIs to ensure that it takes into account the fact that they have an illness, right? And when it comes to gathering information about illness as well, it's about collaborating and consulting the employee to understand where they're at in their health journey. But it also could involve getting them to undergo something like a medical examination to get clear information from a medical practitioner so that you have a clear understanding of, what their illness involves and what they can and cannot do. Okay. Should we maybe do one more, Tim? Is there one you
Yes,
want to
I
do?
can do one more. Yep.
Mhm.
So I've just seen a question. The PIP template shared doesn't include your advice about the transparency statement about potential outcomes. So is that optional to include on the PIP document, or better to communicate that in email? So the potential outcomes of the disciplinary side of things, that's not something that's generally included in the PIP document. That would be included in the disciplinary meeting invitation letter should the employee fail that PIP. Does that, yeah.
Okay. Cool, great. We might do one more, Tim, and then I think we have time for one more. So this question comes from an anonymous attendee, and the question is, when documenting each informal and formal conversation, does this need to be signed off or signed by the employee in question, presumably, sorry. And the short answer to that question is no, you don't need them to sign off, right? So as a matter of best practice, what I generally recommend is, you have that conversation with the employee involved in the process itself, and then afterwards send them an email just to say, hey, look, today at this time, this is what we discussed. You can even use bullet points. If I captured anything incorrectly, please let me know, and just leave it at that, right? There's no need to get them to sign anything. Even the PIP itself, you don't need them to sign it. You work with them in the initial stages to collaborate and make sure that, the KPIs and the targets are reasonable, but there is absolutely no need to get them to sign the documents. Okay. All right. I think that might be it, Tim. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A survey will automatically launch after we end the webinar, and we would appreciate it if you could take a minute just to please fill it in. Again, we'll be sending our answers to the questions we couldn't get to today, so please keep an eye out for that. Have a wonderful afternoon. I think it's almost afternoon now, and see you again next time.